Karen was the kind of person who never backed down from anything. If there was a challenge, she would take it head on. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other, Karen quickly became someone people either admired or shook their heads at. She wasn't like most kids her age. She didn't just follow rules because they were there. Instead, she questioned them, tested them, and sometimes even broke them to see what would happen. Her parents often worried about her wild streak, but deep down, they couldn't help feeling proud of how fearless she was. From an early age, Karen showed signs of being different. In school, while other children quietly raised their hands to answer questions, Karen stood up without waiting to be called on. Teachers found her both frustrating and fascinating. Once, during a history lesson about ancient kings and queens, Karen interrupted the teacher mid-sentence to argue that the ruler in question had made poor decisions. The entire class turned to look at her, some giggling nervously, others wide-eyed with surprise. But Karen didn't care. To her, speaking her mind wasn't just a habit, it was a way of life. As she grew older, Karen's boldness only intensified. By the time she reached her late teens, she had already earned a reputation as someone who could talk her way out of almost any situation, whether it was convincing store owners to give discounts, negotiating extensions for assignments, or standing up to bullies twice her size. Karen always managed to come out on top. Some people called her brave, others said she was reckless, but no one could deny that Karen lived life with a level of intensity few could match. Her hometown was full of stories about Karen's antics. One tale that circulated widely involved a local bakery known for its strict, no free samples policy. Determined to taste their famous chocolate cake without paying, Karen struck up a conversation with the baker, complimenting his work and asking detailed questions about his recipes. Before long, he offered her not just a slice but an entire box of pastries to thank her for her interest. It wasn't manipulation, it was charm mixed with a dash of cleverness, something Karen seemed to possess in abundance. But Karen's daring nature wasn't limited to harmless pranks or negotiations. Sometimes her actions bordered on risky. Once, when she was 16, she climbed onto the roof of the tallest building in town just to prove she could do it. The whole neighborhood gathered below, shouting warnings and urging her to come down safely. When she finally descended, covered in dirt and grinning ear to ear, her parents grounded her for weeks. Still, Karen didn't regret it. For her, every moment of danger was worth it if it meant proving to herself and to everyone else that she was capable of more than anyone expected. Despite her rebellious streak, Karen wasn't a bad person. Deep down, she cared deeply about fairness and justice. If she saw someone being treated unfairly, she wouldn't hesitate to step in, even if it meant putting herself in awkward or uncomfortable situations. This side of her personality made her popular among certain groups, especially those who appreciated her willingness to stand up for what she believed in. Friends often joked that Karen was like a superhero without a cape, always ready to fight for the little guy. However, Karen's constant need to push boundaries sometimes got her into trouble. There were moments when her impulsiveness led to misunderstandings or conflicts. For instance, once at a community meeting, she openly criticized the mayor's plans for renovating the park, accusing him of prioritizing aesthetics over functionality. While many agreed with her points, her blunt delivery offended several attendees, including the mayor himself. Such incidents taught Karen valuable lessons about diplomacy and tact, though she still struggled to balance her outspokenness with sensitivity. When news spread that the royal family would visit their city for their annual parade, Karen felt a spark ignite within her. She had always been fascinated by royalty, their traditions, ceremonies, and symbols of power. But unlike others who admired them from afar, Karen viewed the royals as figures to analyze and understand, rather than idolize. As details about the event emerged, Karen learned that the royal guards would accompany the procession, carrying ceremonial sabers polished to perfection. These weapons weren't just tools, they represented centuries of tradition and honor. An idea began forming in Karen's mind, an idea so audacious that even she hesitated at first. What if she could snatch one of those sabers right out of a guard's grasp? It wasn't about theft or greed, it was about proving a point. Could she, an ordinary citizen, outsmart the highly trained guards tasked with protecting the royal family? The thought thrilled her. It wasn't enough for Karen to simply watch the parade like everyone else. She wanted to leave her mark, to create a story people would talk about for years to come. Over the next few days, Karen meticulously planned her move. She studied videos of past parades, observing the guards' movements and noting patterns in their formations. She practiced quick reflexes by playing fast-paced games and even tried sneaking up on friends to test her stealth skills. Every detail mattered, and Karen approached her preparation with military precision. Yet, despite her confidence, a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. Was she really prepared to face the consequences if she got caught? Could she handle the fallout if things went wrong? Still, Karen pushed those doubts aside. Doubt, after all, had never stopped her before. She reminded herself of all the times she had succeeded when others doubted her. This was just another challenge, albeit a bigger one. And if there was one thing Karen loved, it was rising to meet challenges head-on. With determination burning in her chest, she resolved to go through with her plan. Little did she know, this decision would change her life, forever. The morning of the royal parade dawned bright and clear, with the sun casting golden rays over the bustling city. People had been preparing for weeks, decorating their homes and businesses with colorful banners and flags. Streets were swept clean, flower pots lined the sidewalks, and vendors set up stalls selling snacks and souvenirs. The air buzzed with excitement as families dressed in their finest clothes, children clutched balloons, and musicians tuned their instruments. It was a day everyone looked forward to all year, a chance to witness tradition, pageantry, and history come alive. Karen woke up earlier than usual, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had spent days planning this moment, rehearsing every possible scenario in her mind. But now that the day had finally arrived, she couldn't shake the nervous energy coursing through her veins. As she got ready, she chose her outfit carefully, plain but practical, blending into the crowd while allowing her enough freedom to move quickly. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied her shoes, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. Today wasn't just another adventure, it was the biggest gamble of her life. By mid-morning, the streets were packed with people. Families spread, blankets on curbsides, friends leaned against lampposts, and children perched on their parents' shoulders for a better view. Laughter and chatter filled the air, punctuated by occasional bursts of applause as performers entertained the waiting crowds. Vendors shouted offers of cotton candy, popcorn, and cold drinks, weaving through the throng with trays balanced precariously on their shoulders. Karen pushed her way through the mass of bodies until she found what she considered the perfect spot, a place near the front where the royal guards would pass within arm's reach. Standing there, Karen felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. The sheer scale of the event was staggering. Everywhere she looked, there were people, smiling, cheering, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the approaching procession. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mix of awe and celebration. For a moment, Karen almost forgot why she was there. She allowed herself to soak in the spectacle, watching as dancers twirled in vibrant costumes and drummers beat out rhythmic tunes. It was easy to get lost in the magic of it all. But soon the distant sound of trumpets snapped her back to reality. The parade was beginning. Karen straightened up, her pulse quickening as the first floats appeared in the distance. Elaborate, carriages adorned with flowers and ribbons rolled down the street, followed by performers juggling fire sticks and riding unicycles. Cheers erupted from the crowd, growing louder with each passing act. Yet Karen's focus remained sharp. She scanned the horizon, searching for the unmistakable sight of the royal guards marching in perfect formation. When they finally came into view, Karen's breath caught in her throat. The guards were an imposing sight, clad in gleaming uniforms, with gold trimmings and tall hats that made them seem larger than life. Their sabers hung at their sides, catching the sunlight with every step they took. Each movement was precise, synchronized, and disciplined, a testament to years of training. To Karen, they seemed untouchable, almost mythical. But she reminded herself that they were human, just like her. And humans, no matter how skilled, could make mistakes. As the guards drew closer, Karen's mind raced. She replayed her plan over and over, visualizing every detail. Timing was everything. She needed to wait for the exact right moment, a split second when one of the guards might shift his stance or glance away. That tiny opening would be her chance. If she hesitated, even for a fraction of a second, the opportunity would slip away. Her palms grew sweaty and she wiped them discreetly on her jeans. The roar of the crowd faded into the background as she honed in on her target. The guard she had chosen was tall and broad-shouldered, his saber resting snugly in its scabbard. Karen watched him closely, studying his movements. His steps were measured and deliberate, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He exuded authority, a living symbol of order and discipline. But Karen noticed something else, a slight stiffness in his posture, as though he'd been standing too long. Maybe fatigue would work in her favor, or perhaps he'd adjust his grip on the saber, creating the gap she needed. Either way, she knew she had to stay patient. Minutes felt like hours as the guards approached. Karen's heart thundered in her chest, drowning out the noise around her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, urging her to act. Her muscles tensed, ready to spring into motion. The guard was only a few feet away now, close enough for her to see the shine of his polished boots and the intricate embroidery on his uniform. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Suddenly, the guard shifted his weight ever so slightly, angling his body to maintain balance. Karen's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she lunged forward, her hand reaching out toward the saber. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal of the hilt, sending a jolt of adrenaline through her body. For a brief, surreal instant, she thought she might actually succeed. But then, reality intervened. The guard reacted instantly, his reflexes honed by years of rigorous training. Before Karen could fully grasp the weapon, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. Time seemed to freeze as Karen realized she had been caught. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of shock and disbelief. Faces turned toward her, some wide-eyed with astonishment, others smirking with amusement. Karen stood frozen, her boldness crumbling under the weight of the situation. For a moment, everything went quiet. The music faded, the cheers died down, and all Karen could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She looked up at the guard, meeting his piercing gaze. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm professionalism, but his grip on her wrist was firm and unyielding. Karen swallowed hard, suddenly aware of just how reckless her actions had been. She had planned for success, not failure, and now she was paying the price for her audacity. A nearby officer stepped forward, assessing the scene with a stern look. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, anything to explain herself, but nothing sounded convincing enough. Instead, she stammered, her confidence evaporating like mist in the morning sun. The crowd began to murmur again, some laughing nervously, while others shook their heads in disapproval. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions about what had happened, while adults exchanged knowing glances. Karen's face burned with embarrassment as she became the center of attention, not for her bravery, but for her foolishness. The same boldness that had once earned her admiration now left her exposed and vulnerable. Despite the humiliation, Karen couldn't help but notice the professionalism of the guards. They didn't yell or berate her. Instead, they handled the situation with calm efficiency. The officers signaled for 2 other guards to escort Karen to the side of the road, away from the main parade route. As they led her through the crowd, Karen kept her head down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She had dreamed of making a name for herself, but not like this. Not as someone who had tried and failed to steal from the Royal Guard. Once they reached a quieter area, the guards released her wrist, leaving Karen standing alone amidst the chaos. Her heart still raced, but the initial rush of adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a heavy sense of regret. She glanced back at the parade, now continuing without her, and wondered how things had gone so wrong. What had started as a daring plan had ended in public shame, and Karen wasn't sure she'd ever live it down. Karen's wrist throbbed slightly from the guard's firm grip, but it was nothing compared to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Standing there, surrounded by guards and cut off from the cheering crowd, she felt like a character in a story gone horribly wrong. The weight of what she had done, and how badly it had backfired, pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. For years, Karen had prided herself on being fearless, someone who could handle anything life threw at her. But now, for the first time, she felt truly powerless. The officer who had questioned her earlier stepped closer, his expression unreadable but undeniably serious. He studied Karen for a moment as if trying to decide whether she was dangerous or just foolish. Finally, he spoke. "Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Karen hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wanted to argue, to explain that she hadn't meant any harm, that it was all just a reckless attempt to prove something to herself. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded slowly, avoiding eye contact. "You don't seem like a criminal," the officer continued, almost thoughtfully. "But what you did today is unacceptable. These sabers aren't just weapons. They're symbols of honor and duty. They represent centuries of tradition and service. By trying to take one, you've disrespected not only the royal family, but also the men and women who dedicate their lives to protecting them." His tone wasn't harsh, but every word landed like a hammer blow. Karen had never considered the deeper meaning behind the sabers. To her, they were shiny objects, trophies to be claimed. Now, hearing the officer speak, she realized how short-sighted she had been. The crowd nearby had mostly moved on, their attention returning to the parade. But a few stragglers lingered, watching curiously as the scene unfolded. Some whispered among themselves while others openly stared at Karen, shaking their heads in disbelief. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed at Karen, asking loudly why she had tried to steal the sword. The mother shushed him quickly, but Karen heard every word. Her cheeks burned with shame, and she wished more than anything that she could disappear. Instead of arresting her immediately, the officers decided to use the incident as a teachable moment, not just for Karen, but for everyone watching. One of the guards retrieved a simple wooden sign from a nearby supply cart and handed it to her. Written on it in bold letters were the words, "Respect authority." Karen stared at it blankly, unsure what to do. "Hold this," the officer instructed, "and stand here until we say otherwise." At first, Karen resisted, her pride flaring up despite everything. "I'm not doing that," she muttered under her breath. But the officer raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms over his chest. "You have two choices," he said evenly. "Either you hold the sign and reflect on your actions, or we take you into custody right now. It's up to you." The threat was clear, and Karen knew she didn't have much of a choice. Reluctantly, she took the sign and held it up, feeling utterly humiliated. As she stood there, the reality of her situation sank in. People passing by stopped to gawk, some laughing nervously, others shaking their heads in disapproval. A few even snapped photos with their phones, capturing Karen's mortification for social media. Each click of a camera shutter felt like another nail in her coffin. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, unable to face the judgmental stares. Her mind raced with thoughts of how this would affect her reputation. Would people remember her as the girl who tried to grab a saber? Would her friends tease her endlessly? And what about her parents? How would they react when they heard about this? Time seemed to crawl by as Karen clutched the sign, her arms growing tired from holding it up. Every minute felt like an hour, and the noise of the parade faded into the background. All she could focus on was the steady stream of people walking past her, their expressions ranging from amusement to pity. Some offered comments as they went by. "Maybe next time, think twice before acting so bold," one man said with a chuckle. A woman gave her a sympathetic look and whispered, "We all make mistakes, learn from this." Even though these remarks weren't cruel, they stung deeply because they were true. After what felt like an eternity, The officer returned. He glanced at Karen, noting the defeated slump of her shoulders and the redness in her eyes. "Have you learned your lesson?" he asked simply. Karen nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She had indeed learned something, not just about respecting authority, but about the importance of thinking before acting. Her impulsiveness had always been her greatest strength, but now she saw how easily it could become a weakness. The officer gestured for her to put the sign down. "Good," he said. "Now let me remind you of something. Courage isn't about taking risks without considering the consequences. Real courage is knowing when to push boundaries and when to respect them. You have potential, young lady, but you need to channel that energy wisely." His words struck a chord deep within Karen. For the first time, she began to see her behavior in a different light. Maybe her boldness wasn't inherently bad, it just needed direction. Before letting her go, the officer gave her one final piece of advice. If you want to leave a mark on the world, find a way to do it positively. Use your passion to help others, not to cause trouble. That's how you'll earn real respect. With that, he dismissed her, allowing her to walk away freely. Karen stumbled through the remaining crowd, still clutching the sign, her mind reeling from the experience. She found a quiet bench near the edge of the festivities and sat down heavily, setting the sign beside her. Her hands trembled as she covered her face, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: shame, regret, but also a strange sense of clarity. She replayed the officer's words in her head, realizing how much truth they held. Yes, she had always wanted to stand out, to prove that she was special, but perhaps she had been going about it the wrong way. Maybe there were better ways to make an impact, ways that didn't involve embarrassing herself or disrespecting others. As the parade concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Karen remained seated, lost in thought. The vibrant colors and sounds of celebration seemed distant, now drowned out by the lessons she had learned that day. She knew her life wouldn't change overnight, but she also knew that this moment would stay with her forever, a stark reminder of the difference between recklessness and purpose. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey toward self-discovery and growth. The days following the parade were some of the hardest Karen had ever faced. News of her failed attempt to grab a saber from the Royal Guard spread like wildfire, not just in her small town, but across social media platforms as well. Photos and videos of her holding the Respect Authority sign went viral, turning her into an overnight sensation, but not the kind she had hoped for. Instead of admiration, Karen found herself bombarded with ridicule and judgment. Friends who once laughed at her antics now avoided her calls, unsure how to react to the sudden spotlight. Strangers online dissected every detail of the incident, labeling her everything from reckless to attention-seeking. For someone used to being in control of her narrative, this loss of agency was devastating. At first, Karen tried to brush it off. She told herself that people would forget about it eventually, that life would go back to normal once the initial buzz died down. But the reality was harder to ignore. Everywhere she went, people whispered behind her back or gave her sidelong glances. At the grocery store, the cashier hesitated before ringing up her items, clearly recognizing her face. Even walking her dog became unbearable. Neighbors would stop mid-conversation when she passed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to pity. It felt like the entire world was watching her, waiting for her next move. Karen's parents were no exception. When they heard about what had happened, they called her immediately, their voices a mix of anger and concern. Her mother's tone was sharp, filled with disappointment. "How could you be so foolish?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused, not just for yourself but for our family? People are talking about us now too." Her father, usually calm and supportive, sounded equally upset. "You're better than this, Karen," he said firmly. "We raised you to think before you act. What were you thinking?" Their words cut deeper than Karen expected. She had always prided herself on being independent, someone who didn't need validation from others. Yet hearing her parents' disappointment made her feel like a child again, guilty and ashamed. That night she sat alone in her room, staring, at the ceiling as tears streamed down her face. The weight of her actions and the consequences was finally sinking in. For all her bravado, she hadn't stopped to consider how her choices might affect those around her. Now, everyone she cared about was paying the price for her impulsiveness. Work became another challenge. Karen had recently started a part-time job at a local cafe, earning extra money while figuring out her next steps in life. Her boss, a kind older woman named Margaret, had always been patient with her quirks and occasional tardiness. But after the parade incident, even Margaret struggled to look her in the eye. Customers came in specifically to gawk at her, pointing and whispering as they ordered their lattes. One man even joked loudly about whether she planned to steal his coffee cup next. Karen forced herself to smile through it all, but inside, she felt like crawling into a hole and never coming out. Despite the humiliation, Karen couldn't deny that something within her was changing. The relentless scrutiny forced her to confront aspects of herself she had long ignored. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the rest of the world seemed asleep, she replayed the events of the parade over and over in her mind. She thought about the guards' stern gaze, the officers' measured words, and the crowd's mixed reactions. Each memory carried its own lesson, slowly chipping away at the walls of arrogance she had built around herself. One evening, unable to sleep, Karen decided to take a walk. The cool night air helped clear her head, and she wandered aimlessly through the deserted streets of her town. Eventually, she found herself standing outside the bakery where she had once charmed the owner into giving her free pastries. Then she had seen it as cleverness, a harmless way to get what she wanted. Now she realized it had been selfish, a way to exploit someone else's kindness for her own gain. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. How many other moments in her life had she approached with the same mindset? As she continued her walk, Karen noticed a flyer taped to a lamppost. It advertised a community cleanup event happening the following weekend. Normally, she wouldn't have given it a second thought, dismissing it as boring or beneath her. But tonight, something about it caught her attention. Maybe it was the promise of fresh starts, or the idea of doing something productive with her time. Whatever it was, Karen tore off one of the flyers and tucked it into her pocket, resolving to show up. The next morning, she woke up with a strange sense of determination. For the first time in weeks, she didn't dread facing the day. Instead, she felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that she could turn things around if she truly committed to change. She began by apologizing to the people closest to her. First, she called her parents, admitting how sorry she was for disappointing them and promising to make better decisions moving forward. Then, she visited Margaret at the cafe during her lunch break, thanking her for her patience and vowing to work harder. Margaret smiled warmly, telling Karen that everyone made mistakes and that what mattered most was learning from them. Encouraged by these small victories, Karen threw herself into preparing for the community cleanup. On the day of the event, she arrived early, armed with gloves, trash bags, and a willingness to contribute. To her surprise, several familiar faces turned up, including a few neighbors who had previously avoided her. They greeted her cautiously at first, but as the hours passed and they worked side by side picking up litter and planting flowers, the tension eased. By the end of the day, Karen had earned a few genuine smiles and even a compliment from one of the organizers who praised her hard work. That night, as she collapsed onto her couch exhausted but satisfied, Karen reflected on how far she had come in such a short time. She wasn't the same person who had lunged for that saber weeks ago. The experience had stripped her of her ego, forcing her to see herself and the world around her in a new light. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time in her life, she understood the value of humility and accountability. More importantly, she realized that true courage wasn't about taking risks for personal glory. It was about using your strengths to make a positive difference. Karen didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wanted to live differently from now on. She wanted to channel her boldness into helping others, rather than seeking attention for herself. And though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she felt ready to take it step by step, determined to prove, to herself and to the world, that she could grow, learn, and become someone worthy of respect. Karen's newfound resolve wasn't something that came easily. It took weeks of introspection, sleepless nights, and countless moments of self-doubt before she began to feel like she was making real progress. At first, the idea of changing her ways felt overwhelming, like trying to climb a mountain with no clear path ahead. But as she started taking small, deliberate steps toward becoming a better version of herself, she discovered that change wasn't about grand gestures or overnight transformations. It was about consistency, effort, and the willingness to keep going even when things got tough. One of the biggest challenges Karen faced was rebuilding trust with her family, her friends, and her community. After the parade incident, many people had written her off as reckless or irresponsible. Some assumed she would never learn from her mistakes, while others simply didn't know how to approach her anymore. Karen understood why they felt that way. After all, she had spent years proving herself unpredictable and impulsive, but now, for the first time, she was determined to show them that she could be counted on. She began by reaching out to those closest to her. Her parents were hesitant at first, unsure whether her apology was sincere or just another attempt to smooth things over. Karen didn't blame them. She knew actions spoke louder than words, so instead of just saying sorry, she started showing up in ways that mattered. She helped her mom clean out the attic, sorting through boxes of old photos and mementos without complaining once. She offered to mow the lawn every weekend, something she had always avoided in the past. And when her dad mentioned needing help with a home improvement project, Karen volunteered immediately, rolling up her sleeves and working alongside him until the job was done. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to pay off. Her parents noticed the change, not just in what she did, but in how she carried herself. Gone was the defiant teenager who argued every point and pushed boundaries for the sake of it. In her place was someone thoughtful, patient, and genuinely eager to connect. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, her mom reached across the wire table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. Those 4 simple words meant more to Karen than she could express. For so long she had craved approval from others, but hearing it from her own family filled her with a sense of validation she hadn't realized she needed. Her friendships required similar effort. Many of her old friends had drifted away after the parade incident, unsure how to reconcile the bold, fearless Karen they admired with the person who had made such a public spectacle of herself. Reconnecting with them wasn't easy. There were awkward conversations, moments of silence where neither side knew what to say, and plenty of times when Karen wondered if it was even worth it. But she refused to give up. She invited her friends to coffee, sent heartfelt messages apologizing for any hurt she might have caused, and made an effort to listen rather than dominate conversations. Over time, some of those relationships began to heal, reminding Karen of the value of patience and perseverance. Beyond her personal life, Karen also sought to make amends with the wider community. The cleanup event had been a good start, but she wanted to do more. She joined a local volunteer group focused on helping underprivileged families, spending her weekends packing food baskets and organizing clothing drives. At first, some members were skeptical of her intentions, whispering behind her back about whether she was truly committed or just trying to improve her image. Karen didn't let it bother her. Instead, she threw herself into the work, arriving early, staying late, and consistently going above and beyond what was expected of her. Eventually, her dedication won them over, and she earned their respect, not because of who she used to be, but because of who she was becoming. Through these experiences, Karen learned something profound. Helping others wasn't just about making up for her past mistakes. It was about finding purpose. For years, she had chased thrills and attention, seeking validation in risky stunts and daring acts. But now she realized that true fulfillment came from contributing to something bigger than herself. Whether it was tutoring a struggling student, assisting an elderly neighbor with groceries, or simply lending a listening ear to someone in need, Karen found joy in making a positive impact. Each act of kindness reminded her that she had the power to shape her legacy, not through reckless bravado, but through meaningful action. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. Old habits die hard, and Karen occasionally caught herself slipping back into her old patterns. Once, during a heated argument with a coworker, she nearly lashed out with her usual sharp tongue. But then she remembered the lessons she had learned. The importance of thinking before speaking, of choosing empathy over anger. She took a deep breath, apologized for her tone, and worked to resolve the disagreement calmly. These small victories reinforced her belief that growth was possible, even if it required constant vigilance. As months passed, Karen's reputation in the community began to shift. People who had once dismissed her as troublemaker started seeing her in a new light. They noticed her reliability, her willingness to pitch in whenever help was needed, and her genuine desire to make a difference. Neighbors greeted her warmly when they saw her walking down the street. Parents encouraged their kids to emulate her work ethic. Even Margaret, her boss at the cafe, gave her a promotion, praising her leadership skills and positive attitude. Psycher. Most surprising turnaround came when Karen attended a town hall meeting one evening. The mayor, whom she had openly criticized years earlier, stood up to address the crowd. To her astonishment, he mentioned her by name, thanking her for her contributions to recent community initiatives. Karen has shown us all what it means to grow and evolve, he said. She reminds us that no matter where we come from or what we've done in the past, we have the power to change our story. The room erupted in applause, and Karen sat frozen in her seat, overwhelmed by emotion. It was a moment of redemption she never thought she'd experience. Looking back on everything she had been through, Karen couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. The girl who had once tried to snatch a saber from a royal guard seemed like a stranger now, a character in a cautionary tale she could barely recognize. Yet she didn't regret what had happened. Without that moment of failure, she might never have discovered the strength within herself to change. She had learned that courage wasn't about defying authority or seeking glory. It was about facing your flaws head-on and striving to become someone worthy of admiration. Karen still had dreams and ambitions, but they were different now. She no longer craved attention or validation from others. Instead, she focused on building a life rooted in purpose and integrity. She envisioned a future where she continued to serve her community, perhaps even starting her own nonprofit organization to support causes she cared about deeply. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face it, not as the reckless, audacious Karen of old, but as someone grounded, compassionate, and unafraid to embrace growth. Karen's transformation wasn't something that happened overnight, nor was it a journey she took alone. It was the result of countless small choices, moments of humility, and the support of those who believed in her potential, even when she struggled to believe in herself. Over time, the lesson she had learned from her failed attempt at grabbing the saber began to shape not just her actions, but also her outlook on life. What started as a moment of public shame evolved into a story of redemption, resilience, and purpose, a narrative that inspired not only Karen but also those around her. As months turned into years, Karen continued to immerse herself in community service, finding deeper meaning in helping others. Her work with the volunteer group expanded. Beyond food drives and cleanup events, she began organizing workshops to teach life skills like budgeting, job hunting, and conflict resolution. These sessions were particularly popular among young people, many of whom saw Karen as a role model, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She openly shared her own struggles, admitting how her impulsiveness had once led her astray and emphasizing the importance of learning from mistakes. "We all mess up," she would say during these talks. "But what matters is what we do next." Her authenticity resonated deeply with her audience. Teenagers who had once dismissed her as reckless now approached her after workshops to ask for advice or share their own challenges. Parents thanked her for giving their kids a positive example to follow. Even teachers reached out, inviting her to speak at schools about responsibility and accountability. At first, Karen felt nervous about stepping into such a visible role, worried that she might say the wrong thing or come across as insincere. But as she connected with more people, she realized that her vulnerability was her greatest strength. By being honest about her past, she gave others permission to confront their own flaws without fear of judgment. One of the most significant milestones in Karen's journey came when she decided to pursue further education. For years, she had avoided formal schooling, convinced that traditional paths weren't for her. But as she became more involved in community work, she realized how much she still had to learn. Inspired by the impact she could have, she enrolled in a local college, choosing a degree program focused on social work. Balancing classes with volunteering was challenging, especially since she worked part-time at the cafe to cover tuition costs. Yet every late-night study session and early morning commute felt worth it, because she knew she was investing in a future where she could make an even bigger difference. College introduced Karen to new perspectives and ideas, broadening her understanding of the world and its complexities. She studied subjects like psychology, sociology, and public policy, gaining insights into the systemic issues that affected marginalized communities. Through internships and fieldwork, she gained hands-on experience working with nonprofits, shelters, and advocacy groups. Each opportunity deepened her passion for creating change, fueling her determination to build a career dedicated to helping others. Along the way, she met mentors who encouraged her growth, peers who challenged her thinking, and professors who recognized her potential. By the time Karen graduated, she had already begun laying the groundwork for her dream project, starting her own nonprofit organization. The idea had been brewing in her mind for years, shaped by her experiences and fueled by her desire to address gaps in community resources. She envisioned a center that would provide comprehensive support. Everything, from mentorship programs and educational workshops to mental health counseling and emergency assistance. Naming it Pathways Forward, Karen poured her heart and soul into bringing the vision to life. The process wasn't easy. Securing funding required writing grant proposals, pitching to donors, and navigating bureaucratic hurdles. There were days when rejection letters piled up, leaving her frustrated and questioning whether she was cut out for this kind of work. But Karen refused to give up. Drawing on the same persistence that had driven her bold antics in the past, she kept pushing forward, determined to turn her dream into reality. Slowly but surely, pieces began falling into place. A local business owner donated office space, volunteers signed up to help with logistics, and word-of-mouth spread, attracting attention from media outlets eager to highlight grassroots initiatives, making a difference. When Pathways Forward officially opened its doors, the turnout exceeded Karen's expectations. Hundreds of people attended the launch event, including friends, family, former classmates, and members of the community she had served for so long. Speeches were given, stories were shared, and tears were shed as attendees celebrated not just the opening of a new facility, but also the culmination of Karen's hard-fought journey. Standing at the podium, Karen reflected on how far she had come since the day she tried to grab a saber from a royal guard. Back then, she had been searching for validation in all the wrong places. Now, standing in front of a room full of supporters, she finally understood what true fulfillment looked like. In the years that followed, Pathways Forward became a cornerstone of the community. Its programs touched thousands of lives, offering hope and opportunities to individuals facing adversity. Karen's leadership style earned widespread praise for being inclusive, compassionate, and innovative. She prioritized collaboration, ensuring that everyone involved, from staff members to beneficiaries, felt valued and heard. Under her guidance, the organization grew steadily, expanding its reach and impact while staying true to its mission. Despite her success, Karen never lost sight of her roots. She remained grounded, often reminding herself of the lessons she had learned along the way. Humility, she discovered, wasn't about downplaying achievements. It was about recognizing that no one succeeds alone. Whenever someone complimented her on her accomplishments, she made sure to acknowledge the people who had supported her, the parents who stood by her despite their fears, the friends who forgave her missteps, and the strangers who gave her second chances. Their belief in her had been the foundation upon which she built her new life. Karen's story eventually made headlines, not because of scandal or controversy, but because of inspiration. Journalists wrote articles about her remarkable turnaround, highlighting how she had transformed a moment of failure into a catalyst for change. Local news stations featured segments on Pathways Forward, showcasing the organization's work and interviewing participants whose lives had been positively impacted. One woman tearfully recounted how Karen's mentorship had helped her escape an abusive relationship and rebuild her confidence. A teenager spoke passionately about how the workshops had taught him skills that landed him his first job. These testimonials reinforced Karen's belief that everyone deserved a chance to rewrite their story. Looking back, Karen sometimes wondered what might have happened if she had succeeded in stealing that saber. Would she have become infamous instead of inspirational? Would her name be associated with arrogance rather than resilience? The thought sent shivers down her spine, reminding her of how close she had come to ruining her life. Instead, she chose to focus on gratitude for the lessons she had learned, the people who had stood by her, and the opportunities she had embraced. Every setback, every challenge, and every triumph had shaped her into the person she was today. Now in her mid-30s, Karen stood on the rooftop of the building that housed Pathways Forward, gazing out at the bustling city below. The skyline sparkled under the setting sun, a testament to progress and possibility. She smiled softly, feeling a profound sense of peace. No longer did she crave excitement for its own sake. Instead, she found joy in the quiet victories, the smile of a child who finally felt safe, the handshake of a man who landed a stable job, the hug of a mother who regained her independence. These moments reminded her that courage wasn't about taking risks for personal glory. It was about using your strengths to uplift others. Karen didn't know what the future held, but she wasn't afraid of uncertainty anymore. She had faced her darkest moments head-on and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life of purpose. As she descended the stairs and returned to the busy hub of activity inside Pathways Forward, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought her here. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as long as there were people in need, Karen knew she would continue fighting for them. Not as the audacious rebel of old, but as someone who understood the true power of redemption.